Two members of the Government of National Unity have spoken out for the first time since the 49 white Afrikaners left South Africa yesterday to take up refugee status in the US. Now, Deputy President Paul Mashatile says that bilateral talks between President Donald Trump and President Cyril Ramaphosa are healthy and there's no sign of a genocide in South Africa. Minister of Tourism Patricia De Lille says tourism from America to South Africa has grown by more than 10% in recent times. It follows comments by Trump that the South African government is waging genocide against white Afrikaners. Mashatile and De Lille were speaking on the sidelines of Africa's travel Indaba in Durban.
Tourism from America has grown by more than 10%. There are more flights coming from America to South Africa. America is participating in a G20 working group that's taking place here. So on the tourism side, we are growing our market from America.
Well, when the president decides to visit the US, he will invite President Trump to come here so that he can see our beautiful country, see that there is no genocide here. We are beautiful, happy people, black and white, working, living together. So I hope he will accept the invitation to come because I think he's being lied to. There is no genocide.
Thank you. All right, so Professor of International Human Rights Law at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, Frans Viljoen, joins us for comment. Prof Frans, good evening and thank you for making time to chat with us here on the SABC at this hour.
Thank you. Good evening to you and the viewers.
Prof, let's get into the responsibility and the importance of the correct terminology and rhetoric that needs to be used in framing the issue at hand. Talk to us also about what constitutes a refugee and how this cohort, ultimately aligns with the qualifications and the necessary vetting as well. Help us unpack that from your vantage point scientifically.
Thank you. Yes, I think under international law, we have the UN Convention on the Rights of Refugees, and that is reflected in national law across the world. Essentially, the yardstick, the standard is that the person seeking to be given asylum or refugee status has to show that they have a well-grounded fear of persecution, a well-founded fear of being persecuted in the country from which they are fleeing. So the standard is a high standard. A well-founded fear is a combination between the objective circumstances that prevail in the country that show that the group to which the person belongs, would suffer a very significant harm, in terms of the prevailing policies, and the subjective interest of the individual concerned must show that that person is himself or herself also then subjected to this particular form of harm. And the grounds on which this can be based are race, nationality, religion, political opinion, and membership of a social group. So in principle, someone may say that, there is the well-founded fear of being persecuted on the basis of their race if they are fleeing from a particular country. But the yardstick, I think, is one that has to show significant harm, and the well-foundedness is the onus is on those seeking the refugee status to make out the case on the basis of substantiated grounds and evidence. Now, often the process takes quite a while. It's usually a long process of being vetted. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees come into play and so on. So what we see in this particular instance, I think, is that there is certainly no indication that the standard that is required under international law has been reached. And then when we look at the process, we see that there's been a surprising, I suppose, fast tracking of the process. So clearly, my view is if you talk about framing, we are really not talking about refugees here.
Yes.
If President Trump or the United States wanted to give some form of recourse to people in South Africa that had some kind of a deal that they made with the Americans, they should have been called migrants or immigrants who have some kind of economic opportunity. So economic opportunity immigrants is the term that could have been used, but not refugees.
And Prof, to your point, advisory was sent to dispel some of those misperceptions, and yet it still continues from their side. And even if we are going to acknowledge the economic hardships and crime that is rife in our society, as you mentioned, the standards are quite high when it comes to the establishment of what really constitutes a refugee or economic migrant. And so the dangers of the precedents that this then sets as a result, given that there are others that are obviously seeking asylum the world over, perhaps this has also been fast-tracked. Talk to us a little bit more about the dangers emerging on that front.
Yes, I'm sure the other issue is the eclectic nature of this, targeting or, assisting this particular group. Clearly, if the United States' interest is to ensure that persecution on whatever ground, even on race or on political opinion and so on, is going to be curbed around the world, there are certainly many more deserving corners of the world from which there are already many persons who are seeking asylum in the United States. We can just think in Africa, of countries like Sudan, the DRC. We can think of Palestine, but also Afghanistan, where, for example, women are being persecuted for merely being women and, wanting to exercise their very basic human rights. So on a scale of urgency, and if there was a bona fide interest in the persecution of human beings across the world, this group would really stand very back in the queue of deserving cases that need to do. And therefore, elevating them to the front of the queue begs many, many questions and seeks to suggest that there are other factors at play, geopolitical factors and factors that relate to the domestic situation and the domestic policies within the United States.
Yes, and perhaps also debates on white replacement theories and some questions that they come to the fore on that front, given, the rise of populism and right-wing fascism as well. And so in relation to the stance that has been taken, or the exception that has been created in this in this front towards Afrikaner, asylum seekers or persons that have now entered, is there a violation of international human rights law on the part of America then, with regards to this policy or this exception? What's the recourse or the consequences for them? What should South Africa then also be doing in terms of their approach to maintaining its diplomatic relations, but also asserting its agency as well?
Yeah, I think the U.S. is just setting a bad precedent in terms of framing this, what happens here, as granting refugee status, because it clearly just does not conform with the criteria that are set there. Whether we can now say this is a violation of international law is perhaps a different matter, because in a sense they may say that they are just erring on the side of being more gracious in terms of granting asylum, and that perhaps is not a violation, but it is about what message it sends for other cases that perhaps are similarly located, but which will then have to be treated similarly. And those cases in the US then treats those who are applying differently. I think then the matter of disequilibrium will be very manifest.
Okay, so Prof, there's obviously more questions and answers at this point, but I know that there are ongoing developments and engagements. Thank you for your time and for unpacking that so succinctly for us. We do appreciate you. We'll leave the conversation there for now.